Welcome back to another video. In this video for Objective 6.1, Creating and Managing Group Policy Objects, I want to talk to you a little bit about the GPMC, or the Group Policy Management Console. Before we do that though, let's just take a look at Active Directory users and computers, because what I want to do is kind of show you the structure that we have here and explain it a little bit. So let me just go ahead and zoom in on that. So up here we have our Kintoso.com container, and that's really our domain, right? It's the main object. And then you'll notice the next type of container is built in, and then right below it is computers. Now these two containers here differ a little bit in appearance than this one right here, and that's because they're containers and they're not organizational units. So when we look at organizational units, which are these guys right here, depicted by the little square or whatever you call it on the folder, we can actually apply a group policy onto OUs, but we cannot actually apply group policy onto containers. And we have like foreign security principals, managed service accounts, users, computers, and built-in. Those are created for us when we create the domain. There's no way that you can actually apply a group policy to those containers. Now I have created an OU structure of Kintoso, and then what I did was I created them by object type. So we have groups, servers, computers, all under the Kintoso OU. And we do this because we want to be able to apply group policy in a hierarchical fashion. Let's go over to the GPMC now, and we'll open that up kind of side by side, and we'll notice that we've got domains and then Kintoso. Just move that over a little bit, and then underneath Kintoso we have all of our OU structure, our domain controllers, and then our group policy objects. So let's just take a look at this for a second here. So we'll notice here we have the Kintoso.com domain container, and right underneath it we have a default domain policy. Now this is actually what we call a link. This links to the group policy object down here, and this is actually our inventory of all the group policy objects that have been created. And this is actually the GP, the group policy object, and this right here is just a link to it. Now down here we have domain controllers, and again we have a link to it, to the default domain controllers policy out of the inventory of default domain controller policy, right? That rather group policy objects, and that's our default domain controller GPO. Now if we take a look and we go and look side by side, we'll notice that the computers container is not in here. That's because you can't really do anything in group policy with a container. But we have our Kintoso.com container. We have our groups, or rather OU. We have our groups OU. We have our servers OU. We have our users OU. And then we have our domain controllers OU, and that's where our domain controllers actually sit. And we can see that the structure inside of Group Policy Management Console emulates what's in Active Directory, sans the actual containers or just basic folders that we can't do anything with. So now let's go ahead and just take a look as to where these group policy objects actually are. And I'm just going to go down here and type in //kintoso.com, and we're actually looking at our domain controller right now. This is our sysvol. There's our Kintoso.com container, or I guess folder. There is our policies, and we have two policies in here. Now when the domain was created, these two policies actually got created. One is the default domain controller policy, and one is the default domain policy. And I'm just going to go into and edit the default domain policy. And if I go to the properties of this, we can see that the unique name or global unique ID is 31B2F. And there is our 31B2F. There is the actual GP for the default domain policy for Contoso. And you'll notice that it's broken down into machine and user. And there's settings in here. We can't really directly edit them, but we can kind of peek in there and take a look at, what is actually configured and what the structure looks like. Generally, you don't manage anything from the sysvol. This is how all of your policies get replicated to all the domain controllers. But what I wanted to do is kind of show you the relevance of these folders in here. Now, going back, I'm just going to close that out. Going back here, if we open up, and I'm actually going to create a brand new GPO. We can do it in a number of different ways. When we create a GPO and link it, what we're actually doing is two steps. We're creating the GPO that's going to go into our group policy object inventory, and at the same time we're linking it to the OU. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a brand new GPO, and I'm going to call this Contoso Settings. And I'm going to OK it. You're going to notice that what happened in that step was our Contoso Settings GPO got applied here, and that link also got created up here. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to edit it. Now let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, so when we look at actually editing a GPO, we have our basic structure up here of computer settings or user settings. Now, depending on what type of object you're trying to policy, whether it's a computer object or a user object, you will isolate your settings to one of these different nodes, if you would. Because here's what's going to happen. If a user is under the OU and you set a whole bunch of computer configuration, it doesn't matter that the user is under that OU and this GPO is applied to that OU. If they're not set for the user in the user configuration, it's not going to apply to that object. So the first thing that we have to understand is that we have two different types of settings. We have computer configuration and user configuration. User configuration will not apply to computers, and computer configuration will not apply to users. Now, as we look at the structure in here, whether you're under users or computers, we have policies and we have preferences. Policies are what we originally got in Windows 2000, and every version since Windows 2000 they've improved it. This is how we actually policy users and computers. We have a couple different things. We have software settings that allows us to apply software to remote computers or users, depending on where it's set. We have Windows settings. Those are like security settings, account settings. We have administrative templates, and these are where you actually get to control either the operating system or the user by setting, and we'll talk about the states, by setting the different template settings. Now, those policies are policied every 90 minutes in a process called background refresh. Background refresh is where the settings get reapplied to the computer, and not all of them, but 90% of them get reapplied to the computer. And this is how we policy a computer. Now, there's also preferences, and preferences are not really policied. They're more of suggested. When we log onto a computer or a computer starts up, they will be set, but they will not be background refreshed. They will only be done on the initial startup of the computer or the initial logon of the user. And this is why they're preferences. Now, why would we have preferences? Well, because lots of times we want to set the initial setting, but then allow the user to go ahead and set it. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. If we set the screensaver in a policy, that means that every time the computer starts up, or rather the user logs on, the timer for the screensaver will be 40 minutes. But let's say that you have people giving presentations where they might let this computer sit for 45 minutes, and you want to allow them to make it an hour, right? But if you make it an hour, you're going to affect everybody. Well, preferences, we can push down the preference of 45 minutes and thus allowing them to set it to whatever they want. Whereas if we set it through a policy, one, every 90 minutes it would be refreshed and brought back to 45 minutes, and two, we would actually lock the user out because lots of times it grays out the setting. So this is kind of, group policy. We're going to look a lot more at it as we go through the objective. Hope you gained something out of this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, share my videos, enjoy my videos. If you have any comments, leave them down in the comments section below, Google+, Facebook, or Twitter. And as always, I thank you for watching.